Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Prates, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. I will save you guys 1 week of plugging the MMA Fight Archive, 7-day free trial, blah, blah, blah. You know what it is. Link in the description below. This week, we're going to be talking about UFC Vegas 100, headlined by a welterweight matchup between Carlos Prates and Neil Magny, a true passing of the torch type of matchup here. Obviously, Neil Magny looking to rebound from that loss that he suffered at the hands of Michael Morales a couple months ago, while Carlos Prates hopes to continue his hot streak and continue his finishing streak as well. Great look for him as of late and staying very active as well. The co-main event was supposed to be Cody Garbrandt versus Miles Johns, but unfortunately, Cody Garbrandt was forced to pull out of this matchup yesterday, and that is now leaving the promotion scrambling to find a replacement for Johns, which might actually come into play either later tonight or tomorrow. If that is the case, I will drop in. Actually, you guys will be able to find out what my prediction is for that matchup in the quick picks video, which I will likely drop on Thursday evening. So stay tuned for that. Now, a little bit later of a drop for your boy than usual. Again, I like to aim for Monday drops, but I was unprepared on Monday to do the drop. Then Tuesday was election day for our friends south of the border, so I didn't think anybody would be watching any MMA content on Tuesday, so I took my time with finishing up my work then, and now here I am on Wednesday afternoon doing my recording for you guys and dropping it. And then tomorrow, Thursday, top 3 lock of the night candidates, top 3 dog of the night candidates. My quick picks video will drop as well, and then on Friday, the usual free parlay video and the 3 best prop bets. Quick recap for this past weekend's UFC card, where we had our lock of the night play as Cody Gibson up there in Edmonton for UFC Edmonton, and he goes out there and I think he closed closer to minus 400. So shout out to everybody that was able to get in on him as the lock of the night play around that minus 185 range that I dropped earlier in the week. That cashes. I believe we had a fumble on one of the regional shows. I believe it was ACA, but we also did pick up a win with Cage Warriors, our lock of the night play there. So we went 78-38, or sorry, our record now on the year is 78-38 with a 67% hit rate. Still in the profit, but again, far from the goal that I set for myself. And dog of the night, I was way off on the dogs last week, and I'll take it on the chin, and I'm happy to do so. Got to be open-minded with a lot of these picks. So again, gonna eat dust sometimes. Is what it is. Trevin Giles does not end up coming through for us. We do hit one of the regional dog of the night plays. Can't recall it off the top of my head, but that now brings our record to 45-77 on the year for a 37% hit rate. Again, could be doing better, but could be doing worse as well, like we were earlier this year. Just a quick plug for the MMA LOTN Patreon page. We do have 2 regional shows going down this weekend, again in the form of LFA 196 on Friday and Octagon 63 on Saturday morning / afternoon. If you want access to those breakdowns, you guys can check out the MMA LOTN Patreon page. Link for that is in the description below, not just for those written breakdowns, but a ton of other great content for you guys to check out. And lastly, quick plug for the GodzillaWins.com folks, providing your boy a platform to drop written breakdowns on a weekly basis. On Thursdays, we drop our main event breakdown, and then on Friday, we drop the top 3 money line spots. So make sure you guys check that out. We are profitable on both over the course of the year, so very happy with my performance there. But yeah, make sure you guys check it out, GodzillaWins.com, not just for MMA, which is what I look after, but also all the other team sports that are firmly in their seasons, NHL, NFL, NBA. We got you guys covered. Make sure you guys check it out. All right. I don't want to waste too much more time with these breakdowns here. So let's just get right into it for you guys. Again, might be a little bit briefer than I normally am. Feeling a little bit under the weather in terms of getting this out for you guys, but consistency is key, and I know a lot of people are very appreciative for your boy to drop all the segments that I normally drop, especially these full card breakdowns for you guys. So I do appreciate you guys, and yeah, battling through it here, but we will get it done. All right, let's get right to it. First fight of the night, in the bantamweight division for the women's, we got Melissa Mullins coming in at -240, taking on UFC newcomer Claudia Sygula, who comes in at +205. Now, Mullins had a very bad performance last time around against Nora Cornell in a matchup where she missed weight by 2 pounds, and she looked absolutely horrible come fight day. She had some decent success in the first round, although only one judge scored that round in her favor. She's getting some control time, some takedowns, which is usually the name of the game for her, but Cornell was able to work out of those bad spots and get back to the striking realm where she firmly held an advantage, and that's where she was able to set up the body shot and head kick finish of Melissa Mullins, handing her her first professional loss. Now, Mullins is a fighter that normally looks to get her grappling going, taking her opponents down, and usually does a good job in terms of staying ahead of scrambling situations, utilizing her hips, moving them well, and staying on top of her opponents and maintaining top control while raining down big shots. But we did not see that from her last time around, and I'm going to chalk it up to being an anomaly of a performance. We'll see if she can get it done this weekend against UFC newcomer Claudia Sygula, who did not take the traditional path to getting to the UFC. Usually we see fighters come to the Contender Series in recent years, maybe tough as well, but the other usual suspects are Cage Warriors, LFA, or Fury FC, but neither of those are on the record of Sygula, but she was actually on the Polish and European MMA scene, and she's been able to put together a 6-1 record, 6-fight winning streak. She lost her first fight to a PFL fighter, but Sygula, I don't understand it. She's nothing special. The level of competition she's been going up against, very low level in my opinion. She's been able to go out there and grind out a lot of these opponents utilizing her grappling, but she's going to be up against it here in Mullins, who I believe is a stronger grappler. Again, Mullins has not often shown cardio issues like she did in her last matchup, and I think a lot of that had to do with the weight cutting issue that she had, and I'm, again, going to chalk up that Cornell performance to being an anomaly more than anything. So I'm going to go Mullins here, and I think we'll see Mullins take Sygula down repeatedly, maintain that top position. Sygula does like to throw up submissions at times, but she's only completed one submission win, one armbar win in her 6 pro wins. And I think she's going to struggle to get that submission off here against Mullins. So I'm going to go Mullins and Mullins by decision. That should kick off the card with a favorite win. Next up, middleweights going at it as we have Gore coming in at -160, coming back from a 2-year layoff, going up against Antonio Trocoli, who comes in at +140. Now, Gore has been scheduled twice since October 2022, but unfortunately has been unable to make the trip to the cage due to a wrist injury and a shoulder injury. Now, the 30-year-old hopes to make his return and build upon that submission victory he has over Josh Fremd back in 2022, and showcase that he is as good as he marketed himself to be after coming off the Ultimate Fighter. This kid's still young in terms of the MMA game. 6 professional fights, 4 wins, 2 losses, a big power in his hands, a little bit too low output for my liking at times. We saw him take a grab-a-heavy approach against Josh Fremd, and it didn't really work out for him in the first round, as it seemed the momentum which is really starting to go in Fremd's favor. But then we obviously saw him lock up that submission victory there. Gore is a guy that has the potential to be a good fighter, especially with the power, athleticism, and explosiveness we see from him. He just needs to be a little bit more active with it if he hopes to be successful at this stage of his career. He's going up against Antonio Trocoli, who had a roller coaster of a run over the last 5 years, from winning a contract on the Contender Series back in 2019 to getting cut after testing positive, I believe, for steroids. Goes back to the regional scene, fighting scrubs the entire time, was scheduled a few times to make his UFC short notice debut, which ultimately saw him make his debut back in June, going up against Sharo Magomedov, and he had some glimpses of success, but for the most part, it was a pretty bad performance, which led to Magomedov teeing off on him in the 3rd round as Trocoli started to slow down. Trocoli, long, lanky guy at middleweight, 6'5", 80-inch reach. He's fought at welterweight in the past as well, and even fought as high as 205, but he seems to be settling in here at middleweight. Has an aggressive submission and grappling game when he's the one dictated the pace, but he has been grinding out from that top position, and he can kind of just allow his opponent to dictate the pace, which is what I'm expecting this weekend from Gore. Tough to be overly confident on either guy in this spot, considering the flakiness that they both have shown throughout their careers. The violence spot intrigues me a little bit, the under 2.5, half, as I do think both guys possess the ability to finish the other guy, whether it's the submission approach from Trocoli or the knockout approach from Trishan Gore. But I am expecting to see a newly improved and motivated version of Trishan Gore after missing out on 2 years of action over just due to injuries, as I spoke about earlier. But I'm going to lean Gore here. I think he dictates the pace, makes up the size and reach disadvantage he's going to be at with that speed and power, and eventually he finds that chin of Trocoli and puts him away here. Again, tough to be overly confident considering the long layoff that he's coming off of, but again, Trocoli not that special either. All right, next up, bantamweights going at it here as we have Cody Stamann coming in at plus 235, going up against Blackshear, who comes in at minus 275. Now, we'll start off on the Cody Stamann side of things, who's had a rough run as he's 2-4 over his last 6 fights, most recently coming off 2 straight losses, the first of which to Douglas Silva, Andrade, where it seemed he was a little bit too passive, did win the 3rd round, but unfortunately it was too little too late, and he was unable to get the job done on the scorecards there. And then last time around, just completely outclassed by Taylor Lapilus, who did a great job in terms of stuffing 5 of the 6 takedown attempts from Stamann and touching him up on the feet, which is clearly where Lapilus had the advantage in that matchup. Stamann has a bit of a wrestling background, but likes to utilize his striking style more often than not, utilizing that karate stance, darting in and out of range from his opponents, utilizing that 1-2 down the pipe. A fighter that I believe has kind of underachieved throughout his career. I had way more higher expectations for him, but he did have that rough run of 3 straight losses, capped off by that loss to Said Nurmagomedov. He did bounce back with the wins over Eddie Wineland and Luan Lacerda, but again, he has not really gotten into title contention, and I really expected that for him a handful of years ago. Still very capable veteran, 35 years old. I believe he turns 35 on the day of this fight. Still capable of being very difficult of a stylistic matchup for rising contenders, rising prospects, and that's where he's going to try to carve out a spot for himself on this UFC roster. He goes up against Blackshear, who's also on a 2-fight losing streak, which started off with that super short notice matchup against Mario Bautista, a fight in which he took 7 days after his twister submission victory over Jose Johnson, and that was followed up by an 18-second knockout to Montel Jackson. I believe that was back in July. Very unfortunate loss for him there, as he did not get to show much of his skill set at all. He is a BJJ black belt who utilizes an explosive power striking approach to close the distance so that he can get to his grappling and take opponents to the ground. However, we have seen him slow down with his efficiency later on in matchups, which is where most opponents have been able to take advantage of him and either go to a draw, like the Yusuf Zalal fight, or just finish him late, or even just start pulling away later on in matchups due to his inability to get to his game and the lack of energy and gas tank that he brings into the 2nd and 3rd rounds. He's very experienced from the regional scene, which is why he was ready for UFC level competition when he finally made it here. But I do think through the first I believe it's 6 fights now that we've seen from him, we do know what his ceiling is and where he'll usually end up coming up short, and the guys he'll end up beating. This is a fight where he's going up against a guy that's kind of in the middle there. If this is a fight that Blackshear can win, at 30 years old, he does have the opportunity to still put together a streak that could make him a contender, but I do think he's going to actually be behind it here against Stamann, who I believe is the better overall fighter and has the better gas tank. I think Blackshear will be looking to get this fight to the ground behind his power striking, but Stamann has largely had a very solid shin throughout his career, and his defensive grappling has been pretty stellar, which will make it difficult for Blackshear to get large amounts of control time on the mat. Look for Stamann to stifle the grapple heavy approach from Blackshear, and hopefully he learns from the Douglas Silva Andrade loss by not waiting too much. He should go out there, try to get off on as much damage as he can while defending the grappling approach of Blackshear, and obviously the big power punches coming back his way, and I think we can see Stamann actually pull off an upset in this matchup by being the better and more effective fighter, especially in the 2nd and 3rd rounds. Blackshear is a great fighter, but I do believe he's a little bit handcuffed by his grapple-heavy approach, especially if he's unable to get those early finishes. Give me Stamann, and Stamann by decision. Next up, welterweights going at it here as we have Matthew Semelsberger coming in at plus 130, going up against Charles Radtke, who comes in at minus 150. Now we'll start off on the Semelsberger side, who's on a 3-fight losing streak. Not often do you see fighters get that fourth opportunity to save their UFC career, but considering how active and probably some favors that Semelsberger has done from the promotion, they've decided to bring him back, and it also helps that usually he's involved in entertaining matchups. This guy came into the UFC with an athletic background and utilized that to bully his opponents and either knock them out or control them in most situations and end up getting his hand raised there. It's insane that he has 2 knockout victories in his 10 UFC fights, but he also has 10 knockdowns in those matchups, but only been able to produce finishes in 2 of those fights, 2 of those 10 fights. He is reining it together a little bit better, even though he's coming up short in recent matchups. It's the guys that have been able to grapple him and keep him in compromising positions that have been able to defeat him, and guys that have been able to dictate the pace against him, who have been able to get the better of Semelsberger at this stage of his career. Going up against Charles Radtke here, who's actually coming off of a loss to the fighter in the main event, Carlos Prates, who was able to land a beautifully timed knee to the body that crumpled Radtke and put him away. Radtke actually had won his first 2 UFC matchups leading up to that, finishing Gilbert Urbina by knockout, but going to a decision against Blood Diamond Mike Mathetha. A very solid performance from there, from the BJJ black belt. Now, normally we see Radtke actually look to crowd his opponents with his striking, look for the knockout and try to get these guys out quickly, and he often uses his grappling on a defensive note rather than offensively, unless he seems that, or he feels he has a huge grappling advantage, just as he felt he had in the Mike Mathetha fight. Against Semelsberger, I expect him to take that grapple-heavy approach, but I don't know how effective it can actually be against somebody that's much bigger and much stronger than him. I will still lean Radtke ever so slightly here, as I do think even in the striking realm, he can be competitive against Semelsberger, but I have to give him the edge because of that potential grappling edge he could have in this matchup. Even if he's just able to, clinch Semelsberger up against the cage, maybe get a few trip takedowns, get a little bit of control time, that's more than Semelsberger might be able to do with the big power that he's going to land, and maybe his inability to finish those matchups where he's been able to knock these guys down but unable to get the finish. Maybe Radtke's able to weasel himself out of these bad positions and then get back to the success that he has in his own way. Low confidence here, but I am going to go with Radtke. I do think he ends up finding the finish here over Semelsberger, maybe in the first or second round. The under 2.5 is not a bad spot. Also, Charles Radtke by submission at plus 700, not a bad spot to take a shot on, considering the BJJ black belt that he's going to be bringing into this matchup. Next up in the welterweight division, we have Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos coming in at minus 525, taking on UFC debutant and short notice replacement Zach Scroggin. Now, no need to waste too much time on this matchup. This might be a very bad matchup for Scroggin, and it could actually give us some flashbacks of Zaleski against Benoit Saint-Denis, who he faced in Saint-Denis' UFC debut. Zaleski, very flashy striker, good power striking, has a sneaky submission game as well. And we know that he can make it hell for guys that look to take grapple-heavy approaches, especially if they're unable to really maintain these dominant positions and try to work their opponents into the mat. That's what Scroggin's going to be looking to do with his 7-0 record coming into this matchup. He's a marathon MMA-trained fighter, training alongside Miles Johns, who was supposed to co-main this card, training under the likes of Trey Ogden, who gave him his BJJ purple belt, I believe, about 2 years ago at this point in time. And that's usually the way that he looks to take advantage of his opponents, looking to use his size and strength to wear on these guys and take them to the ground and grind them out. But I think he's going to struggle to assert that dominance here against Zaleski. And then on the feet, I think Zaleski has him absolutely beat here. So I'll be looking for violence here. Zaleski inside the distance. Scroggin, again, perfect through his amateur and pro career, but he has not faced anybody of the likes and experience level of Zaleski, and I think he's going to struggle immensely getting this fight to the mat and then having any success in the striking realm. So give me Zaleski and Zaleski inside the distance. All right, next up, bantamweights going out of here as we have Gaston Bolanos coming in at plus 185, going up against UFC debutant Cortavious Romious coming in at minus 215. Now, starting off on the Bolanos side, he's actually coming off of a loss to Marcus McGee back in January, where he was unable to have much success with the striking at all. We did see McGee try to look for some grappling success, but was unable to get that. But he did manage to land some big shots on Bolanos that slowed Bolanos down, leading to that second round standing TKO finish. Bolanos comes from a striking background, so it was very weird to see him stuck in mud and having almost no success in the striking realm at all. He seems a tad bit slow. He seems like the sport is just not really being kind to him. He does not react well to being hit. I will give him some credit that his submission defense and grappling defense has looked fairly improved, but I really think it comes down to the level of grappler he's going up against, whether he will be successful in that realm or not. He goes up against Cortavious Romious, who's coming in off of the Contender series after picking up a week 2 decision victory over Michael Imperato in a matchup where he shut down the grapple-heavy approach of his opponent and absolutely battered him on the feet. Now, Romious is the guy that normally looks to utilize a grapple-heavy approach, taking opponents to the ground, smashing them from that top position, and opening up submission opportunities. But he does see in certain fights that if he needs to strike rather than grapple, he will do so there as well, and he looks quite effective in that realm. He trains out of Pura Vida alongside Montel Jackson, head coached by former UFC fighter Zach Otto. Seems to be in a good headspace, good training partners, good head coaches. Looks to have a ton of potential as well. Very athletic and explosive. Has a ton of knockout power that he can lean on as well. But I think it's really going to be his grapple-heavy approach, especially in this matchup against Bolanos, which will allow him to see some success and look to see him actually grind this fight out, which could potentially even lead to a submission victory. Again, I've credited Bolanos for having some grappling defense improvements, but I don't know if he'll be able to stand up against a guy like Romious, who can stay busy enough in the striking realm to eventually get this fight to the ground and eventually find that submission. Give me Romious by sub. Next up, we got women's strawweights going at it here as we have veteran Karolina Kowalkiewicz coming in at plus 385, going up against Denise Gomes, who comes in at minus 500. After pondering retirement after a 4-fight losing streak, Kowalkiewicz was able to return and end up going on a 4-fight winning streak of her own. Unfortunately, she ended up running into rising contender Yasmin Lucindo, who was able to sweep her on the scorecards and beat her pretty much in every aspect of the MMA game, whether it was out-grappling her, out-clinching her, and even out-striking her. It seemed like Kowalkiewicz was very much behind in that matchup, and at 39 years old, you can kind of understand why. She has a lot of miles on her body through her 24 professional fights, and usually when she does have success, it comes down against opponents that are willing to exchange in the pocket with her, where she can utilize her effective combination striking approach and even showcase some grappling improvements that we've been seeing from her at this stage of her career. However, it seems like the younger, more complete fighters are going to give her issues here, and unfortunately for her, it seems like she's fighting that here in Denise Gomes. Gomes will be at a slight height and reach disadvantage, again, only by 1 inch in both of those metrics, but I do think her power and youth will come into play here, allowing her to effectively close the pocket repeatedly and land some big strikes on Kowalkiewicz and allowing her to dictate the pace of this matchup. I wouldn't even be surprised to see Gomes actually look to get to the grappling here to really control Kowalkiewicz on the ground and grind this matchup out. Gomes is a fighter that I've been pretty big against in the past, and she's proven me wrong time and time again. But it's weird that she ends up getting grinded out in grappling situations by strikers like Angela Hill and Loma Lookboonmee. I'd be surprised if Kowalkiewicz is able to muster up that much success against her in the grappling realm here, but I do think we'll see some defensive grappling improvements from Gomes, just as we saw last time around against Eduardo Mora, and from there, that should allow her to really start getting into a groove with the striking and clinch success of her own, allowing her to grind this fight out and win it on the scorecards. Minus 500, way too much for me to pay on somebody of the level of Denise Gomes, but she should win this matchup and overcome the experience advantage that Kowalkiewicz has coming into this matchup. But give me Gomes and Gomes by decision. All right, next up, The UFC debut of Mansour Abdul-Malik coming in at minus 365, going up against the returning Dushko Todorovic, who comes in at plus 300. Now, we'll start off on the Abdul-Malik side of things, who earned his UFC contract through a week one victory over Wes Schultz in a fight where we saw him get pushed like we've never seen him get pushed before. His 5 prior matchups to that fight, he was able to actually win in the first round, finishing his opponents with his nasty striking and power that he has in his hands. He does come from a D1 wrestling background, but it's not to the level that you would expect from guys like Bo Nickel and all these other high-level collegiate wrestlers. So we've been seeing him use his athleticism, power, and strength in the striking realm, where he's been able to blitz his opponents and knock them out with big strikes, or from that top position and raining down big ground and pound when he's able to start that dominant position. We saw him get pushed against Wes Schultz, who did a great job in terms of scrambling and never settling for a bad position until he started to slow down after having some solid success in round 2 of his own. We saw him end up folding under the big power of Abdul-Malik, and we saw the TKO finish there. Abdul-Malik is very well trained under the Extreme Couture banner and Eric Nixick. Very physical, very athletic, very explosive, has a ton of potential, but I would still like to see him gain some more experience against fighters that are going to push him a little bit more. We did see him make some mistakes, and I think a lot of that has to do because he has not faced that type of threat in the past, which we saw in the Wes Schultz fight, and we're going to start to see it as he starts taking steps up in competition in the UFC. He's fighting a more skilled fighter here in Dushko Todorovic, but luckily for Abdul-Malik, I do believe his athleticism and power advantage will get him the victory here against the veteran. Todorovic is coming back from a May 2023 knee injury that he suffered at the hands of Christian Leroy Duncan, and I think he is coming back here against a very tough matchup. Again, striking, technically speaking, Todorovic may be the better fighter here, but I do think he's going to crumble under the power and explosivity that Abdul-Malik brings to the table. Minus 365 is just too much for me to warrant betting on a guy making his UFC debut, facing nothing but scrubs other than Wes Schultz on his regional scene, going against a guy that's more battle-tested and Dushko Todorovic. We often see this with the Contender Series. Guys that are just squashing the competition on the regional scene, squashes their Dana White Contender Series opponent, and then come into the UFC and then start facing some legitimate resistance. They end up breaking and don't have the cardio because their style that has worked in the past is not working in the UFC. That could end up being the difference maker here for Abdul-Malik, but I do believe he is being set up in this matchup to actually get a win, and I do believe that Todorovic is a good stylistic matchup. Experience advantage for Todorovic. The veterancy, the striking advantage could come into play, hence why I'm going to be staying off this matchup, but I do believe that Abdul-Malik eventually finds that knockout victory here, and I believe it comes within a round and a half. All right. Next up, a women's strawweight matchup here as we have plus 310 coming in on Luana Pinheiro going up against Jillian Robertson, who comes in at minus 375. Now, I'm always going to be irked at myself for not taking advantage of the Amanda Ribas round 3 prop against Pinheiro, especially considering I've been trying to fade that aspect of Pinheiro's game leading up to that matchup, and that's when it finally ends up hitting. I'll hate myself forever for picking Pinheiro in that matchup. But Pinheiro, solid all-around fighter, good explosivity, good power, good takedowns, good trips, good judo, but as we've seen, when she's unable to dictate the pace and have tremendous success of her own, and even in fights where she does have success in the first 2 rounds, she clearly starts to drop off in efficiency and success in the third rounds because of the gas tank issues that she has and her inability to manage that gas tank. There are fights where she's unable to dictate the pace, which ends up working against her, and that's ultimately why she ends up losing her matchups. And now she's coming off of 2 back-to-back losses where she's been finished in the third and second round, most recently by a striker, by submission, by Angela Hill, who was able to take advantage of a bad decision-making spot for Pinheiro and end up getting that, I believe it was a mounted guillotine, if I'm not mistaken, by Angela Hill. Pinheiro, again, she's 30 years old. She could be making improvements, but I do think we've seen the ceiling in her game, and she's always going to come up short against fighters that she is unable to dictate the pace against. And boy, oh boy, is she going to struggle here against Jillian Robertson? And it makes sense to me why Robertson is such a big favorite in this matchup. Again, she has 8 losses on her record, but it really comes down to the type of opponent she's going up against. This will be a much closer fight than the odds indicate in the first round, but I believe Robertson's ability to set a pace, create pressure, create chaotic moments is going to cause a lot of stress for Pinheiro, which will eventually lead her to slowing down in this matchup, and which will lead for another submission or TKO via ground and pound victory for Jillian Robertson in the second round of this matchup. Robertson is going to be on the gas from jump. And funny to think, through 22 professional fights, she has never been able to put together anything better than a 2-fight winning streak. I think she's going to have the chance to do so this week, and I think she'll come through with it. The spot that I am liking the most in this matchup is the under 2.5. Now, this is a spot that I've often loved to bet for Jillian Robertson fights when she first came into the UFC. Her first 6 fights in the UFC finished under 2.5 rounds. Her 7th fight finished inside the distance, but unfortunately over the 2.5 round mark. Her next 10 fights, which are her last 10 fights, 4 of those 10 matchups have finished under 2.5, but it all comes down to the level of opponent she's going up against and whether she can dictate the pace and have grappling success against them. Credit to Michelle Waterson-Gomez, who was able to use her grappling background to stay out of too much danger there, and she had good enough cardio to withstand that barrage from Robertson over the course of 15 minutes. Pinheiro's not going to have that advantage here, or that luxury, I should say. She's going to break under that pressure of Robertson, and we're going to see Robertson come on home with another submission victory here. But I believe the under 2.5 is the best way to get the best bang for your buck in this matchup. So give me Robertson and Robertson by submission. All right, next up, we got Ricky Turcios coming in at plus 275 in this bantamweight matchup, going up against Bernardo Sopaj, who comes in at minus 350. Now, we'll start off on the Ricky Turcios side, who made a pretty good account of himself against Raul Rosas Jr. last time around, and I believe all 3 judges actually scored that first round in his favor. 2 of those 3 judges scored that first round in his favor because of his ability to create scrambling opportunities, not allow Raul to actually get any dominant positions, or at least maintain dominant positions for long. We even saw Turcios threaten with a few submission attempts of his own, but he was unable to really get too much success to threaten with the finish. Raul obviously takes over in the second round, gets that back position, and ends up getting the submission over the veteran that night. Turcios, such a wild card, unorthodox and weird fighter, from his fighting style to his personality, right? If you guys remember his fight against Ayman Zahabi, I think he only landed like 12% of his strikes, and he threw over like 100 strikes or something like that. It was absolutely crazy because he's throwing so much output, but none of it was landing, allowing Zahabi to win that fight just by being the more accurate and disciplined fighter. Turcios, a lot of unorthodox moves in the striking realm, very scrambly in the jiu-jitsu realm, which allows him to be effective there. Very good cardio as well, all action, all output. Not a whole lot of crazy threatening pressure, which is why he has been a little bit flawed in his game, but he is a tough veteran for a lot of guys to come up against. And that's what Bernardo Sopaj is going to be looking to overcome here, as he's looking to bounce back from that UFC debut short notice spot against Vinicius Oliveira earlier this year. I believe they got fight of the night. Crazy back and forth matchup. Sopaj was so close to actually getting his hand raised that night, but ended up coming up short after emptying the gas tank on Oliveira, who was able to hit his next gear and actually pull away with that finish. But Sopaj, very skilled and highly a guy with a lot of potential. Coming into the UFC, 24 years old, trains out of the All-Star gym over there in Sweden, training alongside the Hamzat Chimaevs, the Ali Talebs, all the other great guys coming out of that camp. Great striker, good speed, good power, improving grappling game as well. He's been able to kind of grind out opponents when he's needed to. A finisher as well, going out there and finishing the bulk of his opponents. I think he's going to learn a lot from that Vinicius Oliveira fight. Now, what I'll say, though, is I think that performance against Oliveira is kind of rubbing off into this matchup against Turcios, hence why he is such a big favorite. We cannot overlook the veteran and strength of schedule that Ricky Turcios has, and his unorthodox nature, which could cause some issues for Sopaj. Not so much to the point that I'm actually going to be leaning on the Turcios side here. I do believe Sopaj will end up being the more effective fighter, landing more damage, making it look better for the judges, but the optics and work rate of Turcios is going to make things a lot closer than the odds actually indicate here. Not so much to the point that I'm going to pick Turcios or even look to bet him in this spot, but I do think we'll see Sopaj be much more effective over the course of 15 minutes, land more damage, get some takedowns, get some control time, but most importantly, that damage is going to be what separates him from Turcios in this matchup. So give me Sopaj by decision, but I'd be wary about taking minus 350 on him in this spot. All right, next up, in a fight that will likely go down as the co-main event unless they find a big name replacement for Miles Johns, which I highly doubt. given that it's already Wednesday of fight week. We got a middleweight matchup between GM3 Gerald Meerschaert, who comes in at plus 245, going up against UFC debutant Rainier de Ritter, coming in at minus 285. Now we'll start off on the GM3 side of things, who did GM3 shit last time around, as he goes out there and gets pummeled for the first round and pulls off a comeback in the second round and submits Edmund Shabazian. Now, Gerald Meerschaert is the Homer Simpson of MMA. For anybody that does not get that reference, there was an episode of The Simpsons where Homer Simpson became a boxer because of his ability to take excruciating damage, yet still come back and win at the latter half of the matchup, or at least just by throwing one punch, because his opponent gets so tired from beating the shit out of Homer Simpson. And that's what Gerald Meerschaert does. Obviously an exaggerated version there, but Gerald, very ineffective early on in fights, but thrives when his opponents are starting to slow down, and then he can get to his high-level BJJ game where he's been able to lock up submission after submission. He's very dangerous and very strong when he gets his grappling going from an offensive perspective, but he's a little bit slow. He's getting up there in age, very hittable in the striking realm. His striking is improving, heavy kicks for sure, but I think his inability to get to the target against better strikers always leaves him in danger early on in matchups, or leaves him in danger throughout the entire matchup if his opponent has good enough cardio to go the full 15 minutes. De Ritter, high-level BJJ black belt. I believe 12 of his 17 wins have come by submission. He does a great job in terms of taking the back of his opponents, getting them to the ground with sneaky trips and sneaky body lock takedowns. Decent striking, very highly tethered off the ONE FC scene where he was a light heavyweight and middleweight champion. He lost both those titles to now the current champion, Anatoly Malikin, I believe, who's actually probably the best fighter outside of the UFC at this point in time, maybe even outside of the PFL, I should say. Very solid fighter. I'm sad that we're getting him at 34 years old. It would have been nice to get him a little bit earlier in his career, but he could still make a little bit of noise in this middleweight division, given the skill level that he brings to the table. And now the fact that he's actually going to be fighting guys around his size rather than looking to go up to other divisions and try to make a name for himself by becoming a double or triple champion. In this matchup against Meerschaert, I do think both guys have high-level jiu-jitsu games, but I do think that De Ritter's overall advantage here, his cardio will be good enough to go 3 rounds if he needs to. I believe he's a little bit faster. I think his striking is a little bit better. The speed advantage, like I said earlier, probably going to be a big difference maker in this matchup. But I do think that De Ritter is the more skilled fighter here. Slightly less miles on his body than Meerschaert, who's eaten a ton of damage. And sometimes his chin shows up and he can go the full 50 minutes. Sometimes it doesn't, and he ends up getting knocked out in the first minute of every matchup. But De Ritter, highly touted, UFC prospect, even though he's 19 fights into his career. But I do think he's highly skilled, and I think this is a very winnable matchup for him, hence why he's the big favorite here against the UFC veteran Gerald Meerschaert. So I'm going to go De Ritter. I'm going to go De Ritter inside the distance. I think he wears out Meerschaert and then eventually finishes him. All right, like I said, Miles Johns and Cody Garbrandt was supposed to be the co-main event, but Garbrandt was forced to pull out of this matchup on Tuesday, so let's get right to the main event, which goes down in the welterweight division as we have veteran Neil Magny coming in at plus 550, going up against Carlos Prates coming in at minus 750. Now we'll start off on the Neil Magny side, who's been alternating wins and losses over his last several matchups, most recently coming up short against Michael Morales, who was able to land a beautiful spinning back elbow after dealing with the grapple heavy and clinch heavy approach of Neil Magny, which Magny had almost no success with. And then that spinning back elbow led to a ground and pound finish for the prospect, Michael Morales. Prior to that, Neil Magny was on the verge of losing a 29-28 decision to Mike Malott back in January. Luckily for him, Magny's cardio advantage and pace advantage allowed him to survive the late onslaught from Malott, reverse the position, and end up getting a TKO finish with 15 seconds left on the clock. Magny, veteran of all veterans, right? You're talking about a guy that's faced pretty much everybody that the welterweight division has to throw at him. High pressure, high pace, loves to mix it up in the clinch, not so much with the ability to take his opponents down, but just wear them down in the clinch with shots to the body, chipping shots, small shots just to get ahead on the scorecards and wearing his opponents down and run away late in matchups. And that's where he is very good in terms of utilizing and weaponizing his cardio, setting that high pace and breaking opponents late. Unfortunately for him, he comes up short against two particular opponents. Guys that are good leg kickers and tremendously better strikers than him, as we've seen with guys like Lorenz Larkin and Ian Gary in the past, or guys that are tremendously better grapplers than him, as we saw with guys like Gilbert Burns, Rafael Dos Anjos, guys that are able to take him to the ground and submit him relatively easy or grind him out, like we saw with Michael Chiesa. Unfortunately for Mike Malott, he chose to use both styles, and when he was unable to get Magny out of there, he ended up gassing himself out and losing that fight in the third round. Now he's going up against a very good striker here in Carlos Prates, who's, I believe, on a 9-fight winning streak and has won his last 3 UFC matchups, all by knockout, most recently dispatching of Li Jingliang, who's historically a guy with very good durability. So to see Prates pick him apart and eventually finish him the way that he did, very, very impressive from this striker who had a ton of experience even before coming to the UFC, not just with 22, 23 fights of pro MMA experience, but also from his kickboxing and Muay Thai days, which is what he usually leans on when he steps foot inside the cage. His defensive grappling has improved tremendously, but I love his ability to work out of bad spots in the clinch against the cage, which is going to be very important for him here against Neil Magny, who will likely be looking to keep him against that the cage and the fence, just so that he can wear him down and get to his game the way that he normally does. Prates digs underhooks, pivots off the cage very well, does not do a whole lot of settling against the cage, which allows him to continue to operate at space where he's able to get into a solid groove, throwing good combinations, nasty strikes up the middle, good body shots, good combinations. The guy is very, very well trained and very skilled. Training alongside the guys that fight, the fighting nerds as well, you know they're going to be coming in with a great game plan, and also have studied Neil Magny inside and out, knowing exactly what they'll need to do to dispatch the veteran and put him away in the spot. I do believe that Prates will do a good enough job in terms of chipping away at Magny and eventually finding that finish in the third or fourth round of this fight. Minus 750 is just too wide, and usually at a spot where it's a prohibitive favorite for me. I wouldn't even be looking to parlay him here because of the little that it does for parlays. Maybe throw him into a Hail Mary or something like that, but I'd be very surprised if he ends up coming up short against the veteran here and Neil Magny. So I'm going to go Prates. Might be close early, but once Prates starts working the leg and slowing Magny down, that should allow him to get to the rest of his striking game, which will lead to him getting this win by KO, like I said, probably in the third or fourth round. There you guys go. Full card breakdown for UFC Vegas 100. I appreciate you guys being patient and waiting for this to come out on Wednesday. I'll be back tomorrow again with a ton of other segments. And again, reminder, we have OKTAGON and LFA going down this weekend, which I will be breaking down strictly on the MMALOTN Patreon page. Check the link in the description below for that. Otherwise, I will see you guys tomorrow. See you then. Peace.
Last thing.